Welcome to the Family Pictures Podcast, the Family Pictures Podcast. I'm Jim Groom, and I'm joined here today by my elegant co-host,
Michael Branson Smith.
Thank you, Michael, for jumping in there. That was right on cue. Here today, we're kind of continuing our look at 1980s teen movies. And I'm sure Michael and I will have a lot to say about our next film. But to put it in a bigger context for you, we've been watching 1 week a Cameron Crowe film, starting with Say Anything. The next week a John Hughes film, and we're kind of working backwards, and we watched Some Kind of Wonderful. Last week, we returned to Cameron Crowe's The Wildlife, and this week, we're kind of going to John Hughes' Ground Zero with 16 Candles from 1984, which Michael and I kind of believe might be the greatest year ever in film.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
good. It is my desert island year of film.
There you go. So here today, we are ready to talk about what I was really, so I hadn't rewatched this film in years. And so I sat down again, a kind of ongoing narrative for me, and I said, Antonella, please sit down and watch this teenage film with me. I know you hate it. It's your worst genre, but I think this one's going to be good. And surprise, surprise, Antonella really liked 16 Candles.
Oh, really? Why do you think she liked it?
I think one of the things she said, and I think it's one of the reasons, I steal all my ideas from Antonella, so let's be clear about this. But one of the reasons she said is she said, as an Italian watching this film now, it's kind of one of the most, in her mind's, accurate time capsule of what she experienced as an Italian looking at American 80s films. Meaning the way in which they presented the 80s in America. And I think that's super interesting, right?
Yeah.
Because
the super white waspy version of America.
Yeah, and Italy suffers from that too, let's be clear. And the idea here though is particularly, she said, that opening montage when after the whole thing happens with Sam and her family forgetting her birthday, and we'll talk about that, she gets on the bus. And then the credits start rolling and you walk out to the high school. And there's a pretty interesting montage that gets us going into the film that she remarked on. It was kind of a really interesting dream vision from the 80s of style, of culture, of some sense of suburban white, U.S. Vision of the world.
Of high school especially.
I agree, and I think John Hughes nails it.
Yeah, he was. I mean,
in this film.
And one of the things that it's interesting to the Molly Ringwald was one of the teenagers. Anthony Michael Hall, both 15 when they made this movie, and
amazing.
This is we should say this is also John Hughes' first opportunity to direct. Right, he had written, Vacation and Mr. Mom, and I actually learned, even though we've done both of those films already, which is funny enough, Vacation, I think, being our first film for the podcast, and Mr. Mom was a film that was literally taken away from him. It was supposed to be a TV movie, and he got kicked off, he got fired in the way it was written. And he talked a little bit about how he just wished. He wanted control. He's like, it's the next step in the process, and there's ways he envisioned things, and that when he watched the movies, that's not what he saw. Even though it was insanely complimentary of particularly Michael Keaton from Mr. Mom, and also Chevy Chase in Vacation. But to your point, these teenagers, Molly Ringwald and Anthony Michael Hall, and even Leanne Curtis, who plays Sam's best friend Randy, and there's some great stories I got to bring up about her. There's an awesome interview from her from about a decade ago, and they were just so young, and they really appreciate, even though Molly Ringwald in particular problematizes a lot of the racism and sexism of John Hughes films now, but she still can't help but still point out he got teenagers, he got their voices, and one of my favorites is that he just got youth voices, like Mike's voice, Sam's little brother, his quotes are my favorite of the whole film, like in terms of quotes. And
You won't be
get to
going
some
to
of
the
those.
wedding. Promise?
His idea of the classic sarcastic little brother who just endlessly trolls the entire family is a
Where's
highlight.
my bag? It's a leather bag. Where'd you leave it? Don't be a smart ass.
Better to be a dumbass.
Yeah, exactly. Better to be a dumbass.
He's so great.
And that's how the film starts. And quick tip that you left.
But
in
wait,
the
we should go to
document.
let's finish your high school thing, because I think that's really important, because you pointed out a bunch of montage moments too, which are, these, and it's funny because I wrote them all down too, like a kid struggling with his lock on his locker because you were assigned locks and lockers, and it was always, and then the way that high school couples like walked hand in hand, either with the hands in each other's back pockets or with their pinkies intertwined, which is so funny.
So great. Or just holding hands, which is the classic. But I was interested in that montage of the fetish around feet and the shoes. And shoes are a big deal still.
The tapping,
But it's interesting because there was not a Nike to be found. There were Converse, there were Capezios, which is one of my favorite, but there was no Nikes. I looked. There was no Nikes to be found.
Right.
And there was this great scene where you go a close up on a denim jacket, and the denim jacket has all these buttons like "I love Evanston," which is where they are.
Well, it's the classic, and it's the politics / love of whatever music culture, like the buttons.
Yeah, DOA, use contraception, all of these kind of strange, almost like kind of I have a vision, or I have a high school idea. Like I'm starting to emerge with some of these ideas, beautifully drawn in just a very tight montage. There's the best, my favorite. There's many, but one of my favorites is there's a girl with ripped jeans. I'm assuming it's a girl with drip because you never see her face, and drawing a big heart on her knee with a marker.
Yeah, just doodling on oneself. Yeah, I remember that too. Just the way you draw hearts. Yeah, it was just such a thing. It was a thing. Like I can literally remember that being in 5th or 6th grade, and your ability to draw a heart was like a moment of culture, which is so weird.
Exactly, and you put initials in it and plus, and then you'd be able, if you were really fancy, you'd put the arrow through it.
Oh yeah.
And so anyway, the last piece, and and the New Wave sunglasses was another little bit.
Yeah. Oh yeah, the Marvel Cyclops sunglasses. Yeah.
So good.
Yeah.
But the one that struck me is, as we finally get to the end of this montage, you end on Sam, or Molly Ringwald, who's at the locker with her friend. And it says written and directed by John Hughes, and it's kind of his moment. And I really love the way they use the titles. But behind her is a whole crew of kids with red Adidas jumpsuits and Kango hats. And if you read into it, and as the scene starts, they're there and they walk away. They're a bunch of African-American rap breakdancing kids who definitely represent the emergence of another subculture. One John Hughes doesn't deal with, and that's fair, but he sees it, and it's there, and it's represented. And I think there's something about his ability to represent and give voice to someone who was going to high school at that moment is uncanny.
Yeah, I mean the way teen culture, and but it also, just as importantly, there's the teen culture side of it, which is like their world, but they're also their world in the context, their point of view, actually betterly described, within the context of the family. And so to introduce the Baker family, because that's the core of this. So Sam Baker turned 16, happenstance, the day before her older sister is going to get married. And so the MacGuffin of the plot, for those that happen to have not watched this film, is basically the entire family is chaotic and they forget her birthday. Up until Paul Dooley, who plays the dad, has a scene with her at the end of the evening.
Does this remind you of any other families you can think of? We haven't seen the film yet, but does this opening scene remind you of any other families?
No. I mean, funnily enough, it's more Mr. Mom is what I think of right now.
I think basically Home Alone is a rewrite of this film. I just think he rewrote it.
I've never watched all of Home Alone. I've seen snippets of it. I've never watched it.
It is super interesting to watch this film and realize that Home Alone is essentially the bones of this film, but just a kid stays home rather than goes to school.
Right, and it's even young. It's a younger, the entire film is Mike's point of view, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Instead of Samantha, it goes down a point. Exactly.
And in both films, I mean, again, I know the obvious basics of Home Alone. It's the classic. It's also this large, family and the middle child being forgotten. And in this film, Sam is the forgotten child. Or in Home Alone, it's the Macaulay Culkin character is the forgotten child, and like being lost in the shuffle. And what's great is this is part of the, for me, the thing that stood out the most in my rewatch of this, because I've watched it more than it hasn't been a long time. I tend to rewatch movies all the time, and is the lampoon humor. Like I forgot how John Hughes, the better part of a decade, he spent writing for Lampoon, National Lampoon, the magazine that was like the sister to Mad Magazine, which is these are iconic magazines that were just filled with sarcasm and parody. And that's what they were constantly parodying popular culture. And this was revolutionary at the time. That wasn't a thing. Like we see that all the time now through, through clips and YouTubes and all that kind of stuff. But at the time, the way you found parody of the now was through these two magazines primarily. And so John Hughes was baked into his meeting, and it also made like weird science make a lot more sense. It's basically it's like a lampoon. Like I loved in Mad Magazine in particular, like the cartoons, like when they would do Jaws, and it would be the parody of Jaws with all the because I was more of a visual person, and the cartoons like so attracted to me, and I was like, but I was so confused because I was so young. I was like, what's actually going on? I thought this is supposed to be Jaws, and I think like in the Mad Magazine, Jaws is probably like eating pizza. Probably, I mean, I don't remember, but it wouldn't surprise me. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Same with Star Wars. Like you get it, you're fired up to read about Star Wars, and it's like, oh, they're making fun of Star Wars?
Yeah. We were too young to get that. But this is his bread and butter. And, and there's all these lampoon-ish bits, and I have a whole huge list of them. And a lot of them are sound cues, like these kickers, with music or sound effects. And the first one is literally the opening scene of the family. It literally starts with an air raid alarm, right? And it's to just define the chaos of the Baker family from the jump. And the way that Mike, and this is the beginning of Mike quotes, are just in it immediately. Mike and his little sister, and the little sister gets her only line of the entire film, which is, "Dad, Mike hit me." And then of course, like Dad's like, "Don't hit your sister." And he's like, this is my favorite quote. It's like Mike's to his dad. It's like, "Dad, I didn't hit her. I'd like to very much, and probably will later, but give me a break. You know how I operate. I wouldn't hit her with you around." I was like, that's fucking classic.
Yeah. Antonella enjoyed the character of Mike. And also, I didn't pick it up, but when you said it, he was the kid in Kramer versus Kramer.
Yeah, Justin Henry. He played Billy, and he's still to this day the youngest nominated Academy Award nominee in the supporting actor category. He was only 8 years old.
He was 8. Wow.
Yeah. And so that's the family. Like and there's chaos abound, we have the classic bumbling dad played by Paul Dooley is like, "Where's my briefcase? Where's my briefcase?" And like, he's opening closets, and like, fishing rods are flying all over the place, and Mike is just torturing everybody. But there is one note, like this is a home that has a luxury. You remember what the luxury that even the dad points out?
Yeah, she has her own phone in her room, her own phone line in her room.
Mm-hmm.
And he never had one growing up.
No, well, I mean, it's still like, can you imagine if you had your own phone line in your bedroom as a kid, as a teenager?
Did not happen.
I mean, because landlines, like this is back. I mean, we all have cell phones now, and nobody even knows what the hell a landline is. Never mind like a rotary telephone and how those operate. But man, those were a heck of monopolies, and they were terrifyingly expensive. You remember how much trouble you could get in if you called long distance, and you were like,
exactly.
Yeah.
Who called Jersey?
Yeah, it's like, and we're talking like just a neighborhood away, and nobody's like, what, long distance charges? You remember like marking out long distance charges and like phone bills with college roommates and stuff? It was brutal.
Brutal.
You know?
No, I agree. And it's funny because that point you're making about the not only lampooning, but just a lot of slapstick. Like everything falling out of the closet. And there's a lot of kind of, which I hadn't seen in the first time watching it, and I didn't know what he's referencing, but the sound cue is brilliant. The slapstick, great. Michael Anthony Hall does a great job with a lot of his slapstick. Yeah. And I think it's just great. One point I wanted to make, and you did it really well, the opening shot of this film. The opening shot of this film has a pickup truck going down a tree-lined street in some suburban, we're assuming Evanston, which is kind of around where he is, or Skokie, Illinois. And there's two hands, one on the driver's side, one on the other, just throwing out newspapers. And there's a dog that comes, and the newspaper hits the house, and that's why the alarm comes. I picked this point in this kind of moment because it is almost identical to a similar scene we see at the beginning of Stepfather, where you have the paper boy go on this tree-lined street and throwing the paper boy, and once he throws the paper, it takes you into the house.
Right.
That place where there had been a kind of, mass killing versus, a comedy.
Wait, is that a different Home Life you're talking about?
But I wonder if Ruben, who directed Stepfather, was playing a bit on this, cliche of the 80s and the suburban place, but what's behind it is obviously Daddy knows best. But anyway.
And I think that stuff is the framing of the neighborhood, because this, I would imagine Antonella may have connected with that as well. Like, this is the iconic style of suburbia, like these big, beautiful houses, that are all manicured lawns, and they're all slightly different and attended to in different ways. And it is the ideal of, making it the real American dream, like the white American dream of this big, beautiful house with nice neighbors and nice, lawns and tree-lined streets and getting your newspaper in the morning. But even in John Hughes' world, which is a comedy, obviously, so it's more lighthearted, there's chaos, and that's what's kind of fun about it, and, and back to the, I have a whole list of lampoon humor, but I can hold off on it. There's so many fun
I'm ready.
things. Some of them, okay. So in the high school, when Jake and his guy friend are trying to have a conversation about Sam, and Jake's like trying to say like, hey, do you know who Samantha Baker is? And he's like, do I think about her? What? There's nothing there.
It's like void.
But in the background, number one, it's this massive, beautiful gym. But in the background, there's a wrestler, giant man, running around chasing a little kid. And at the end of the scene, they just literally have him like press him WWF style and toss him.
It's awesome.
And there's all these sound effect cues that come across the entire film, and which leads into one of one of my thoughts is the meeting the grandparents is, the Twilight Zone music. So Samantha's coming home after high school, and she's trying to enter her bedroom, what happens to be, you get a sense like it's an attic conversion into a bedroom. So she's got a more private space. So she goes up the stairs, and as she's coming to the top of the stairs, she's like, the Twilight Zone music comes on, and we see like the grandparents, like the grandfather's garters holding up his black socks and his talk about the foot fetish you were talking about.
Oh my God, yeah.
And then what is it, Grandma Dorothy and her like pantyhose socks around her heels that are like these short heels because she's a grandmother. And she's like cringing, and the Twilight Zone music's going, and it's just so funny. And then she tries to walk away, and then she's forced to like engage them.
Tell you, it's one of those scenes too where I was like, I couldn't separate myself from Molly Ringwald or Michael Anthony Hall when I watched this as a teenager, because I identified too directly. Like, do I find them attractive? Do I like this? Am I like them? Right? All those other things. But watching this now as an adult, many, many years later, Molly Ringwald really nails this role. She's so like, I love like looking at her, like her reaction to the grandparents and just playing that kind of figure, this kind of adolescent, high schooler who's kind of going through all these other changes in her body and her life and other words, and then dealing with the adults. Like, I had to say, it was at that point in the scene when she was dealing with the grandparents where I was like, I don't think I ever gave Molly Ringwald enough credit for this role.
Oh yeah, and John Hughes. I mean, just back to him, like writing this script. She is his muse, and there's writing about in an interview he described how apparently once she was cast, and this is when the film was still an idea. Once she was cast, he basically put up a photo of her, which is maybe a little creepy treehouse, and wrote the entire thing in like a weekend. Which is classic John Hughes, Mr. like prolific. I will write 22 scripts in 10 years and direct 8 of them. Like, what an absolute psycho. And so, like the way that young people deal with adults and especially grandparents. And the thing about the grandparents, which I love, is the grandparents represent being stuck in their social norms that are of a completely different generation. And, so Howard and Dorothy Baker, which are obviously, Samantha's dad's parents, appear to be very like working class and they're socially awkward. But being grandparents, they're completely comfortable with who they are. They're like, I don't care. And they're literally in their underwear. And they don't say, come on, oh, Sam, give us a moment. We'll come down and say hi, like someone socially normally. They're just, at least Grandma Dorothy has the grace to put on a robe. But like Grandpa Howie's just like, hey, I'm in my like boxer shorts, in my underwear, my gutters around my socks. And you're like, oh my God. And the classic hello, he's like, she does the appropriate, like, how are you? And they're just like rolling into all their medical problems. Uh-oh, you're muted.
Nope, I got it. Okay. But the other thing too is that's one set of grandparents, not even my favorite set. No. My favorite set of grandparents are and I don't know who is whose dad and mom.
Oh, it's definitely no. So Fred and Helen are the second two. They're because they're literally because Howard and Dorothy are Grandpa Baker, so they have to be the dad's parents.
Ah, gotcha.
And so Fred and Helen, they're the more you take them, you describe them.
Yeah, they're a little bit. They seem like they're more preppy. They seem a little bit more well off. It's apparent that she doesn't cook. The whole skit was great. Was opening a box of Entenmann's donuts. Like, breakfast is served.
Oh, right? The breakfast the next day is one of my favorite scenes. Yeah, with them.
But the whole thing is, what's the name of the preppy dad?
Fred.
Fred. He's the funniest because he comes up with these crazy jokes and embarrasses everybody. But one of the ones that I don't know, can I tell one of his jokes?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so this is a joke that we quoted, and I still quote to this day. It's, quiche, how do you spell? And then Grandpa Fred's like, ha, 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 you don't spell it, son, you eat it. Yeah. And to me, I still say that. Like, that one, and that was the experience with me watching 16 Candles.
Yeah.
Again. It's like, Antonella's like, oh my God, you're like in a trance. You're like mouthing all of the words. You're mouthing everything everyone says. You're pointing like Michael Anthony Hall. You're doing all the things. I'm like, yeah, I had no idea. It was like riding a bike. You get back on this film and it was like, I'm in.
God. You know what that makes me think of is, we are unsurprisingly, the children of these films, and so our mannerisms, as you're literally describing, and the quoting, and the emulating. Like I remember my friend Brian Toohey loved to like emulate Eddie Murphy from like Beverly Hills Cop and stuff like that. And our mannerisms are of that generation. Absolutely. But to speak of grandparents, my wife Amanda's grandfather, we all called him Pop. He literally had the mannerisms of the Brat Pack. It was something that dawned on me. We were all out to dinner and he was in his ascot and he did this thing where he just like, moved his head, rocking back and forth, and I was like, that's like Sammy Davis. That's Sammy Davis Jr. or Frank Sinatra kind of movement, And it's so interesting to think that we as human beings can't escape like the popular culture around us and being these kind of reflections of it.
Yeah, it reflects us, but then also it creates us.
Yeah,
right? It's like both. And that's what I think is most interesting about film. That's why I love film. And so there's other lines like, we'll get to Long Duck Dong because probably the most controversial figure in the film, and not without real reason, actually.
Oh no! And the funny thing, he's the only character. He has his own Wikipedia page just to let people know, like how controversial this character became over many years later,
and like. Film critics will return to this film. Not only that, with like rape culture of the film, and like it's like Animal House in that regard. Like, it's not perfect. It's got problems. Let's be clear.
No, but it's stuck in its time, and that's what we expect. And so in the way that, so like a little bit more about Fred and Helen, we, because moments later, because this is John Hughes, it's like, let's just like, and he talked about, it's like, this is the real life of a 16-year-old, but just shoved on into a single day. And so let's compress the meeting of the grandparents, like within 10 seconds of one another, because as she comes down the stairs, she runs into Fred and Helen, and as you described, they're way more polished but way more racy, because we have Helen scolding Fred, but then a hot minute later Helen's like talking about Molly Ringwald's like breast size, and literally leads to the infamous moment where she feels her up.
I can't believe I just got felt up by my grandma, right?
Yeah.
And those little self-narrations are great, right? Because she'll be sitting back on the bed, and then she'll tell you. And like that whole thing, it's I liked it. I mean, again, it reminds me a lot of Home Alone.
Yeah, there's I love, we kind of often do this where we talk about, kind of the spaces that the kids inhabit or the parents inhabit. And, the Leanne Curtis, who played Randy, Sam's best friend, there's this great interview with her from about 2013, and she talked about how in that era, like her bedroom, because it's presented as well, she's like, her bedroom, she's like, I can't even remember what was in there, but it's like, I just remember that I wished it was my real bedroom,
It
because
had
they're
the
so
80s
young.
like it had like the 80s wallpaper with those kind of invisible vanishing point lines. It was a bizarre room. But I'll tell you, Sam's room, give you a quick for example, that wicker mirror that she had, that she was looking into when she was saying, I don't feel 16, I still feel 15, and I need a great birthday and 4 inches of bod, or whatever she says. But there's this nice wicker white, I don't know if it's nice, a wicker white stand-up mirror with a big white base. My sisters had that in their room. Like, that piece of furniture is one of those things where it's like a trigger. It's like, and then you, by a simple relationship to a detail, which Hughes does brilliantly, you're pulled into that world. And so much care and attention is given. All the Duran Duran posters, all the Thompson Twins Culture Club, they're all there, right?
Yeah. And even Mike's room, like Mike has like the license plates from different parts of the different states in the country, and and he has like, I think, a Sammy Hagar poster in his room. That's
right. Yeah.
But what's so interesting is to contrast it with Jake Ryan, who's like from the uber wealthy family, right? So his home is only presented in the context of this like chaos party that his girlfriend is hosting, and this place gets destroyed. But his bedroom, and it's something I like to dive into Jake a little bit in his like home and family life, because we never meet his parents, and we only are left to imagine what his relationship with his parents must be like, because he's so chill as his house is being utterly destroyed. I mean, the wine cellars being just broken through with the lumberjack character with dropping the weights through the floor. But his bedroom, when he attempts to call Sam and on her line, but instead gets, Grandma Dorothy and Grandpa Fred, and it's a really funny scene. But his bedroom, which is interesting to me, it was in contrast to the Baker family bedrooms, and even Jenny's bedroom we'll get into too, which is kind of cool. And Jenny's a funny character as the older sister who's getting married the next day. But Jake's room is kind of cold, right? It's like it's an adult's version of a kid's room. It's got these really modern lamps and spreads, and there's this really nice print of like a tall ship above it that looks, kind of like a map, like a pirate map. And there's like the synchronicity poster to the side, and there's these medals affixed to the lampshade. But it says, and he has his girlfriend's photo above on the mantle too of Caroline. But it doesn't feel homey at all. Like he hasn't made it his space at all.
No, I agree with that.
And it just made me wonder, like it reeks of like this is a transient space of wealthy people, and like they're not really there that much. I mean, the place is destroyed, but they talk about like this is his second party, so it must be just fine. He's loaning out his dad's Rolls Royce to like
with a $5,000 grill. The grill alone, $5,000,
and to like a 13-year-old kid.
Exactly.
So
I think the other thing though with Jake that's worth thinking about is he's one of the few really rich kids in the world of John Hughes that doesn't come off like a demon.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, a James Spader demon. Yeah,
exactly. Or Craig Sheffer in Some Kind of Wonderful, right?
Or even too awkward. Like, I mean, I guess technically the what's his name from Pretty in Pink,
Andrew McCarthy.
Andrew McCarthy is the awkward rich kid, but
he almost wants to reject it, which I guess is a similar. You're right. It's a similar case with Jake. He's ready to leave that life.
Right, but Jake is more self-aware and confident, whereas like Andrew McCarthy's character is just kind of like, I am so tortured.
But Jake was also like literally a heartthrob.
Oh,
as a result of this movie, he didn't really do much more as an actor, but like there would be girls in my school who would be like, Jake from 16 Candles?
Oh,
like he's so easy on the eyes and stuff.
Of course. I just want a relationship. I want to love. My favorite one of my other things, like Jake talking about his desires of what he wants in a relationship with Anthony Michael Hall, the 13-year-old in the film. And Anthony Michael Hall is like, and meanwhile, this is in the context where Anthony Michael Hall is properly basically mixing two cocktails, right?
It's the best scene. Anthony Michael Hall steals this movie for me.
In a lot of ways, yeah. And he's talking about what he wants in a relationship, and Anthony Michael Hall is like, yeah, that's so brave of you to talk that way. I know many other boys that want what you want.
Well, let's get to Michael Anthony Hall, because I think Farmer Ted is probably a topic. He was the one, when I was watching this film as a 13-year-old, 14-year-old, who I idolized as a result of this film. And it was interesting to hear that he was only one of many people who interviewed for this role or went into audition for this role. One of the others, think about this, Jim Carrey.
Yeah.
So could you imagine Jim Carrey in this role?
I know.
But John Hughes said, you know what? The problem with all of them is they played the nerd just like too nerdy. Like they kind of put the glasses on and the thing. And they Michael Anthony Hall came in and was just a kid who happened to be a nerd. And I think he plays that really well. Like from the scene where he hits on Samantha in the bus, and then you got Joan Cusack, a very young Joan Cusack, in a neck brace, who's amazing.
Joan Cusack, she's the classic emblem of the Lampoon humor. Like every moment she's in the picture, she's so effing funny. It's just
amazing. So
like her trying to drink a beer is probably my favorite. And that's the thing. It's like, just as a quick aside, even though she's this random geeky character, she's everywhere, right? She's on the bus. She's at the dance. She's even at Jake's party. So she's accepted, right? So even though she's wearing this neck brace and I disagree with, modern perspectives of her of being like a caricature. No, she's a real person who's going through this awkward moment as a teenager. And she's riding it. She's riding it hard. It's great.
Yeah, and she's a great character, even when she cleans
The
off
water.
her mouth with the dress on her weird ass sweatshirt.
Yeah, man, the costume designer, man, you gotta credit them with that stuff.
So
but that also just showed she was like a trippy, just like cool chick.
Yeah, she was great. I mean, and we'll talk more about her brother in this too.
Yeah,
second role he's ever in. We have Farmer Ted trying to hit on Samantha, and the first one doesn't go so well, and but he's on the bus and he's so cool. He's coming, he sits behind her, he's got the hands, and it's just like, you gotta respect Michael Anthony Hall because he knows he's, shooting above his pay grade. He's trying to do more than necessarily,
always trying to do more than he needs to.
And high school would allow him, if you will, right?
Right.
But he's kind of like, he doesn't care. Like he's in it. He's funny, right? He has
he's
a good
the king
sense
of the
humor.
dipshits.
Yeah, he's believable, right? Yeah. And I just loved him in this role. And he comes back again when they go to the dance, and that's the big thing. We have the dinner party before the dance with the grandparents. And when we do get introduced to Long Duck Dong, and I always read Long Duck Dong as, this exploited exchange student. And obviously they have, the bong, the gong, and they're playing up the, the highly problematic Asian elements there too, and kind of playing with it. But some of the other points is you could see those old school grandparents exploiting this kid. And there's almost like this American Gothic weird going on in that space.
With Fred and Dorothy, basically, and he's talking about he loves me on his riding lawnmower. I spend a lot of time doing some labor for the grandparents.
Exactly, keeping up their farm, if you will.
And Geddy Watanabe has talked a bit about this character as well, and he understands it was problematic, but at the same time he was talking about look, man, there were so few parts for Asian men, and he made the most of the character, and he's incredibly funny. I mean, his comic timing is outrageous, and there's a ton of commentary out there about this character, and probably one of my favorites is this indie comic book artist and writer named Adrian Tomine, who's Asian American comic artist that I loved in the 90s. He had these comics called Optic Nerve, and they were about his kind of hipster life / awkwardness that he lived as he navigated relationships and stuff like that. And he had this beautiful, simple, hand-drawn line style that was super clean that I loved. And he wrote a single-page comic about this character. And he in this, and I'll read you some quotes. Basically, he talks about how this character destroyed his life in high school, and you get a sense that Adrian Tomine lived the life of the being a rare Asian kid in a white American high school space, and he talked about how basically all the kids in high school be say, what's happening hot stuff to him, or no more Yankee my wanky, and it's Donger need food, hey Donger, and as he'd walk through the hallway, someone would do the gong, the bong, and this is what he was living in the 80s as a teenager, and it just brutalized him. And then funnily enough, in the same comic, it shows he got this opportunity to interview Geddy Watanabe in 2001. And he talked about how he understood how he did it because of the opportunities, and he really liked him. And then, but funnily enough, it ends with him watching Geddy again in the film Booty Call, and he's yelling again at the television, "You stupid fucking asshole!" Because that's how the comic starts as well. It's he's just dealing with these characters that Asian men in this context are forced to play, and their feminization, and they're emasculated in a lot of ways. But at the time, Getty was like, this was the role I had, and boy, he ate it up for what he was able to do. He's incredibly funny.
He becomes, I mean, for better or for worse, one of the most memorable characters, most memorable lines. Yeah. He's quoted extensively. You know, his relationship with that woman is fascinatingly funny. Like it opens joke after joke after joke. So, yeah I mean, I do. It's hard not to rewatch this film years later, knowing you know all the potential trauma maybe that character caused. And I guess hindsight is problematic in its own ways. But one of the scenes that I didn't really realize at the time, but hit me really, really strongly on this watch, was so they're at the dance. And she sees Jake and freezes up. And so then her friend leaves her. And then Farmer Ted is making a deal with his two other nerd friends, one of whom's John Cusack, the other of whom is a man by the name of Darren Harris.
Yep.
How do I know that? Well, I am in 1992-93. I am starting my job on UCLA campus at a place called Audiovisual Services. So I walk in, I'm doing my job. I'm there maybe a few days. I walk in, and out comes this fucking guy, Darren Harris, who's in this movie. And if you know this movie, there is no way you can forget John Cusack's brother with the headgear, and he's got this weird mouth, and he's tall, and you just know he is really the king of the geeks.
Yeah.
He comes walking towards me, and I look at him. He sees me recognize him, and I'm just about to say it. And he's like, yeah, I was in 16 Candles. And I was like, oh my God. And then since, we worked together, and it was like he left that life, and he was a student at UCLA, and he went on to do whatever. He was kind of a hipster and stuff. But I had a run-in with that geek and worked with him for years on the UCLA campus.
Yeah, the when you Google him, because I looked him up, when you Google him, the first photo that shows up to speak of his hipster creds is a photo of him with the Beastie Boys,
Absolutely. Yeah, he was definitely and that's another story if you want to know. I don't know if you know this about me. Do you know this about me?
Well, I don't know if you don't
tell me.
Let
me tell you. I am probably one of several people, but not that many, who actually brought hipsterdom to America. And it was at Ground Zero at AVS at UCLA. That was where hipster movement, which people made fun of for 20 years since, I helped start that on that. And you
campus. Did you also open Kim's Video on the East Coast somehow? Were you part of that?
No, that was not.
That's not your version.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
had already done that.
I had already done that.
That was before you moved to LA.
Yeah. Kim's Video thinks they're hip. I did a mini Kim's Video in my basement before there even was a Kim's Video.
Yeah, ordering your films by genre and director rather than alphabetically and stuff like that.
They were posers, Michael.
Gong.
Gong.
All right, yeah. Which I mean, just to give a couple of hits, so one of the other, some of the.
I still got to make my
moments. Point. Well, let me give you.
Will you let me make my point? Damn it.
Oh, okay, go ahead. So you started hipsterdom.
I wanted to say, probably for me, the revelatory scene in this whole movie was when Farmer Ted goes into what is basically like the auto shop class.
Oh yeah.
Sam, who's had a terrible day, and now this is kind of, escalating because she couldn't, Jake smiled at her and she couldn't do anything. Her and Farmer Ted have this moment. And it's a sincere moment of exchange, and he's trying to kind of hit out of her, but she's kind of like, no. But then she's like, I understand. And they both become no longer the caricatures they're playing, and they become real kids who you identify with and understand. And both of them seem really cool at that moment. And they're kind of their masks have kind of fallen. And you see in kind of what happens in The Breakfast Club too. You see them as just kids, not as part of any one crew or a geek or, an alterno chick or whatever. And I just thought that was such a great scene, and I had not caught that earlier on when I watched it. So that's what I wanted to say.
And that somehow connected to your starting of Hipsterdom. That's why I was just like confused. I mean, but that's okay.
I just had to tell the Darren Harris story in order for me to get there. It's a chronological thing.
Right. Well, I had a intermittent which is another lampoon moment with the submarine sonar while Darren is wearing those goggles that like emulate, they're like night vision goggles, and that's the nerddom going on. But the audio hits to keep us like thinking about how goofy this whole situation is. But yeah, I mean that moment is probably one of the best pieces of acting as well between the two of them, where they just get to play out their characters' roles and it's interesting too. It's like you kind of think about, and this is also I think why these films. This is where John Hughes beats in a lot of ways Cameron Crowe. Cameron Crowe is presenting reality. Like he presents like assholes and awkward and work and all this stuff. John Hughes, and which you connect to loosely, but you never you identify certain things with, but you're not inspired or wishing you understood yourself more through this film. Like, and this is the difference. It's like John Hughes is trying to connect with you more emotionally. He wants you to identify how you might aspire to be able to let yourself be calm enough and real enough to have a proper conversation, rather than doing the thing you're always doing, which is, putting up this facade of this is who I'm supposed to be in this context, and this is who I'm supposed to be in that context. And that's what he does, and that's what the entire film, The Breakfast Club, is about. And this film gives us a glimpse of that, as you described.
So, and I will say this too. I've been thinking a lot about the Cameron Crowe, John Hughes split, right? Because the Wildlife is a year before this, but made just about the same time. And then I think next week, I don't want to give it away, but we probably have to go to Fast Times. I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. But if I'm thinking about the two right now, one of the things with the Wildlife you see is he's kind of balancing, and you brought this up while we were discussing that, being between the kind of sex comedy genre and the teen genre. Like, it's kind of still wants to be at the nudie bar. It wants to show the breasts and stuff. Whereas I think and that's like the Porky stuff, right? Everybody was like, give me a little bit of Porky's, because Porky's made so much money.
Though John Hughes, he succumbed to that in this film with the Caroline character in the shower. But the Lears are the two girls, which is very different. So that's very interesting.
Yeah. And that's interesting. I actually totally forgot that scene, because it seemed almost asexual, if that's oddly enough. But there's the scene where also, like, she gives Ted the geek her underwear. Like, there is a sexual undercurrent to it. Yeah. But it seems like this film, unlike Cameron Crowe's, is about creating this new kind of, celebration of the freaks and geeks. Yeah. Celebration of alternative within the high school. And as we saw with Some Kind of Wonderful, this idea of being independent. This idea of thinking for yourself, self-reliance, right? Like, but this is the germ of it. This is ground zero. And so many of the commenters and so many of the reviewers talk about what a break from the Porky's teenage school. Yeah. Like, what a break. What a new kind of, teen drama. And I would argue, and someone out there should argue with me, but first you have to listen to the podcast. But I would argue,
is this a hot take?
Hot take. I would argue that Cameron Crowe, after seeing John Hughes' film, said, you know what? I have to take a page from his book, and that's where Say Anything comes from.
Yeah, that's probably right. Because, I mean, that is, even though Say Anything came first, like I think that's like peak Cameron Crowe understanding, like a teenager and the distress of this moment that is so wound up in your life. And even though we're the quote unquote Family Pictures podcast, teendom is so still, no matter what, intertwined with parents, whether they're literally there or not, and their influence. Like I talked a lot about how Jake, you just kind of are left wondering what his family situation is like, because you see his home life through the context of this party, but you're just like, this is so crazy and weird. And so, and it is right. Like that scene in the auto body shop is what makes me want to talk about, The Breakfast Club, because the entire film is the auto body and all the awkwardness of people jousting beforehand, the way that, like, so for example, basically, the geek is jousting with Sam on the bus or on the dance floor beforehand. And like, before they start to let their guard down, and then it reverts to their natural behaviors, which is a big part of the Breakfast Club.
Yeah, and even the fact that Farmer Ted says, I'm going to take her home, or I'm going to be with her as long as my dad says it's all right. Yeah. Right? Like, there's that weird moment. And Jake is like, what? Like, so there is.
That stood out to me, too. Mom, it's like, Mom, I got my headgear on. That's another one, too.
And so everywhere in this film, you're right. The specter of the parents and the fact that they're still living with the parents. And, the parents are, in many ways, what they're either reacting against, or, that scene of Paul Dooley, who was great in Breaking Away, but I think he's even better in this because he's kind of a more calm dad. Yeah. He's not. He's like, refund. There's none of that. Yeah, exactly. And his has a great, like, when I think about trying to connect with my daughter, who's a high schooler and who's going through some of this stuff, like, it was really cool. He was like, tell me that at least. It was useful so that I can go to bed, right?
Oh, well, let's set this up, because this is the scene where, at the end of the day, we should do this entire scene, because Dad and Sam have a talk, is what I just labeled it as. And this is the scene that John Hughes wrote for Paul Dooley just so he would accept the role, mind you. So otherwise, he was like, I'm not doing enough. I'm not going into your picture just to, like, be the normal dad. But this scene, is... at the end of the day, so the party's still going on, at Jake's house.
She doesn't go. Sam never goes.
She never goes. Whereas Long Duck Dong and the gym rat high school girl go together. But anyway, she's had a miserable time, and this is when the dad finally comes down, because she's been also jettisoned to the couch. You're what does he call it? Mike say, like, couch city baby.
Couch city baby, when he's got his headphones on.
Yeah, classic.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, Paul finds her there and finally, like, apologizes. He's like, we forgot your birthday. And so there's two things about this. This is where Molly Ringwald, being just incredible, when he finally apologizes, she's recognized in her face, the way she communicates to Paul Dooley, like, I'm being recognized, my dad. Though I'm 15 and I'm trying to, push myself away from you, your recognition is everything to me. And that look on her face and the way she pulls that off, it's so wonderful, because you're talking about, like, how do we connect with our teenage kids as they're understandably doing what they're supposed to be and try to find their lives outside of their parents, still in these moments deeply connect to you and want you and need you. In that moment, she's, like, presenting that in just a look, and it's so remarkable. But, you're right. The conversation is just so funny and forgiving of a dad. And he's just like, in the confusion about the Rudy character who's marrying Ginny. And if we want to get in, we don't have to, but the whole scene with the Rudy's family.
Oh my God, that's really another one I quote extensively.
Okay, so we'll I know we're on a clock with you today, so we can talk about that one.
I can look. I just can't touch. He's the best. That's another one we quote extensively.
I know.
People will still say when I have a drink in front of me in Long Island, wolf it.
Just wolf it.
Wolf it. Just from this scene. It's that kind of scene,
And then, but he's so forgiving.
But this movie is filled with those scenes.
Yeah.
Like, it's like scene to scene of quotable amazings.
Yeah. And then my favorite thing is, like, when, she's trying to relate to him, like, I'm not the cool kid, Dad. I'm not Ginny, because Ginny's like the one who was like super popular. It's kind of alluded to, and she's like, her room. I loved her room because she has all these artifacts of horse culture, and she must have so she's the more spoiled one. She wanted to be part of like highbrow life, and she competed in show jumping because she's got trophies and stuff like that. But she knows she's kind of a dork, especially because she's a sophomore. And then there's this quote, it's like, and the dad's like, I don't think you're a dork. I don't think Mom thinks you're a dork. And then she says, Mike thinks I'm a dork. And he's like, yes, but Mike is a dork. So it's they're all exactly. The way that and then he goes on to compare her to Ginny and how he's worried about Ginny because she's not so self-aware, and he doesn't worry about her. And that's the whole point of this. It's like the way that a parent tries to communicate to a child through their siblings, for example. It's like you have to, but the idea is like the way you described how it ends. That's the best part, right?
Yeah, and then the fact that he says, and I love your sister, but you're different, and I love you in different ways because of different strengths. And it was just a good moment, right?
Yeah.
And I think this movie, like in the car, has those moments where the comedic lampooning nonsense stops for a second and it breaks through. And that's hard for any film to do with any kind of sincerity.
Right.
And this has a couple of moments of where it really nails it.
Yeah, there's we can peg them all so easily. It's literally the auto shop. It's when oddly it's when Jake and the geek have a conversation in the kitchen.
Absolutely.
because the way that conversation culminates is he's letting Jake know that that Sam actually likes him and has been asking about him, and he's like, don't bullshit me or I'll kick your ass. And it's like, Jake, why would I bullshit you? Because I know you'd kick my ass. But the best thing is he says but just so you know, if you're just into her just to as another trophy, I'll find someone bigger than me, or I'll figure out how to kick your ass.
Exactly. It's like, Jake, what do you mean, Jake? I love it, the way he deals with Jake when Jake comes to him in the gym. He's like, what did I do? No, I didn't. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to.
At the dance. Yeah.
It's so good.
But this is the third one. This is the third one. And it's probably the most between, I don't know. I put this one and the auto body shop up against one another as being these really real moments in this it's not even slapstick. It's just because lampoon humor isn't slapstick. It has a slapstick aspect to it, but it's just more tart. It's because it has that edge of being trying to parody, and the little parody is there with the riffs from the Dragnet show that was associated with the geek a couple times, and and the Peter Gunn theme. Yeah, and the dun 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 dun, which is famously from the Blues Brothers too, and stuff like that. And even just silly stuff. I love at the wedding at the very end, because Ginny's hopped up on muscle relaxants, and Paul Dooley, and we don't really. It's not that important, but it's just funny. Paul Dooley literally has to drag her down the aisle because she's barely standing.
But
and
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I would say the Ginny thing after the wedding, it's she's I can't get out of this stupid dress fast enough in these heels, and she kicks off the heel, and we get the classic penny whistle though, as she flips it, and then the glass shattering, because that's lampoon. You got to add these little tweaks because that's part of this kind of style.
Yeah, and I love that. And that's something I didn't pick up. And this time, you're right. All the sound effects, which seemed goofy at first, but after a while, you're the movie's kind of goofy in its own way, and it's intentional. But the final scene when Jake does come to her and they do have her birthday cake proper, and that kind of romantic scene is another moment where this fantasy of our character is kind of being lived, but it's also a real one. And it's heartening, and it's a good way to end the movie. And the movie is a kind of high school drama where high schoolers get some respect for what they're going through. Right. And
she still gets the affirmation moment because before the cake, Paul Dooley glimpses Sam's connecting with Jake at the wedding right before they're supposed to go to the reception, and she's mouthing, "This is the boy," and totally. It's and he's thumbs up, you're a cool kid, daughter, and that's what's so awesome.
Yeah, I agree. So, you know what? John Hughes, he's on the board.
He's
Some didn't like Some Kind of Wonderful, but with 16 Candles, Crow, look out.
Watch out. More coming.
Watch out. Look, Fast Times is another epic one. This one I put up there with 16 Candles as formative. Ground zero.
Okay.
Can it live up?
All right.
Tune in next time and find out.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.